Om Tavakatamritam Taptajivanam Kaviveriditham Kalmashapaham Shravanamangalam Shrimadatatam Bhuvihanti Bhuriraja. Your words are like nectar, bringing life to scorched souls. They are praised by poets and remove all sin. They are auspicious to hear, wonderful and exalted. Those who spread these words throughout the world are truly giving souls. Welcome, everyone. Let me apologize in advance for having a little bit of an allergy attack today. This month of September is always challenging for me. So don't get nervous if I sneeze or cough a little bit. We're on page 258, the Gospel. It's Saturday, July 14th, 1883. Chapter is called the Festival at Panihati, but it actually covers many days for some reason. So we've already finished that. And Sri Ramakrishna arrived at Adhar's house in Calcutta. Adhar we've now met on several occasions. He started coming uh, very shortly after M, within a year or so, but started coming fairly frequently and became very close with Sri Ramakrishna because we'll see that Thakur will be going to his house uh, on consecutive weekends. Yeah. So, and he was a young man, 30 years old, and had a nice position, deputy magistrate. And there's a little bit of a ongoing play throughout the gospel that takes place with regard to Arthur trying to get a better position and asking people to give him recommendations and things like that, and Thakur telling him to be content with what he has. And Thakur had some premonition, it seems, that Arthur would not live long. Yeah. So he thought, now give your time to thinking of God. He never told him that because your days may be short, but probably that was something that some intuitive thing that he had. And he died. He fell off a horseback riding. Yeah, some very funny thing like that. So Sri Ramakrishna arrived at Adhar's house in Calcutta. Rakal M and other devotees were with the master. Adhar had arranged to have Raj Narayan, the famous singer, and his party recite the Chandi. Raj Narayan began the recital in the worship hall. He sang, "I have surrendered my soul at the fearless feet of the Mother. Am I afraid of death any more?" As the master listened, he became filled with divine fervor and joined the musicians. This Chandi recitation is very famous, that usually it's not simply chanting from the Chandi. Usually there's some Bengali devotional songs and I don't know, Kali Kirtan or Sangit, something like that, that will accompany all of this. So he starts out with this type of bhajan, you can say, but there'll all be songs to the Divine Mother, and in the form of Durga or Kali, and Sri Ramakrishna always goes into some type of, I forget, some ecstatic mood when this takes place. We say Thakur was Sarva Bhavamaya, that he was the embodiment of all moods, all spiritual attitudes, and practiced all of them. But he seemed to revert back to this what he called Shantan Bhav, the attitude of looking upon God as mother and oneself as the child. This seemed to be something that was natural to him. And it's interesting because it wasn't something from his childhood. Maybe it was hidden in his childhood. But the family deity, of course, was Raghuvir, a form of Rama. And we know that he partook in everything, Shivaratri and everything like that. But it seems like after he came to Dakshineshwar and was priest of the Kali temple, and then, of course, his first vision was Mother Kali in the form of pure consciousness. From that time onward, it seems like in between his other sadhanas. Huh? Interesting that he did all the Vaishnava sadhanas after that. But in between, and then when everything was finished, this seemed to be the basic mood that looking upon himself as a child of the Divine Mother. As the master listened, he became filled with divine fervor and joined the musicians. Now and then he improvised an appropriate line. Suddenly he went into samadhi and stood still. The singer sang again. Who is the woman yonder who lights the field of battle? Darker her body gleams, even than the darkest storm cloud, and from her teeth there flash the lightning's blinding flames. Disheveled, her hair is flying behind as she rushes about. Undaunted in this war between the gods and the demons, laughing her terrible laugh, she slays the fleeing asuras, and with her dazzling flashes she bears the horror of war. This is, of course, things that are described in the Chandi. This is saving mankind from these demons, these asuras. How beautiful on her brow the drops of moisture appear. About her dense black hair the bees are buzzing in swarms. The moon has veiled its face, beholding the sea of beauty. Tell me, who can she be, this sorceress, wonder of wonders? Shiva himself lies like a corpse, lies vanquished at her feet. Kamalakanta has guessed who she is. With the elephant gait, she is none other than Kali, mother of all the worlds. Kamalakanta was, I don't know, second to Ram Prasad, but anyhow, some people will say the equal to Ram Prasad is a wonderful poet saint, as Ram Prasad was. I think he lived about a century later, even more recent than Ram Prasad. But his poems and songs are very, very beautiful. One thing that's interesting is that who is the woman? The word that they use here for woman is kamini. And because this is such a sensitive point when Thakur uses that phrase kamini kanchan. And some people think that this is a pejorative phrase. The kamini means a lustful woman, something like that. But we find that this term kamini is used most often for the different types of consort of Shiva, or Kali or other forms. And it's used as a name in Bengal. I think Girish Ghosh's second wife was Kailash Kamini. So it means the consort of Shiva, living on Mount Kailash, something like that. Sri Ramakrishna was in deep samadhi. So this is all we get for that day. Then this is next week, Saturday, July 21st, 1883. It was about 4 o'clock in the afternoon when Sri Ramakrishna, with Ramlal and one or two other devotees, started from Dakshineshwar for Calcutta in a carriage. As the carriage passed the gate of the Kali temple, they met M coming on foot with 4 mangoes in his hand. Throughout the gospel, probably at least 3 different times, we find that M shows up just as they're going some other place. Or on the way, they see him. So they say, hop in, and he gets in the carriage and he goes with them because he's coming just to see Sri Ramakrishna. Sri Ramakrishna was going to visit some of his devotees in Calcutta. Master to M with a smile, come with us. We are going to Adhar's house. So this is 2 weekends in a row. M got joyfully into the carriage. Having received an English education, he did not believe in the tendencies inherited from previous births. No, I think you have the original, the Bengali. They say he did not believe, or he had some doubt.
He says that.
No, he didn't have any strong belief,
No.
we can say. And this is something that I found very surprising. uh, that I was under the impression that this was such a universally held belief in reincarnation. uh, and to find that, because when M says he doesn't believe in samskaras, Punajanmo or samskaras, samskaras, the tendencies, he doesn't mean these tendencies that we see in a person. He means the tendencies that came along with the birth due to the previous lifetimes. So the one and the same. If if he doesn't believe in the past life, he won't believe in samskaras the way it's normally meant, because they'll always say someone is born with good samskaras. Now we acquire them in this lifetime also. So if we're born with certain tendencies, then our environment takes over, our education, everything takes over, and we these tendencies get a little bit changed in different directions, and we develop new tendencies, new samskaras. Uh, this is that little area of free will that we have, which allows us to transform ourselves. If it weren't for that, these samskaras would just uh, drive us like just a mechanical toy. We wouldn't be able to change anything. We would just keep acting in accordance with these old tendencies of the mind, and we wouldn't be able to make any spiritual progress. So we have this a little bit of free will that we can control ourselves and control these tendencies.
Now, the gunas. The
Yeah.
gunas are also intricately associated with this or with the samskara.
These gunas, yeah, because some of our samskaras will be tamasic samskaras. So we may be born with some tendency towards laziness and procrastination and things like that. And the same thing with Rajasic and the Sattvic. So these samskaras will have a color to them. Yeah.
Some kind of in between, like certain percentage of tamasic, certain percentage.
Yeah, everything is a mixture. Is a mixture, and nobody is born with, say, we could say, okay, this person is a 20% sattvic and 50% tamasic and 30% rajasic. Different areas of our life and with different times of our lives, different periods, that we'll all have a different mixture of these things. We may be very sattvic in one area and very tamasic in another area. We may be very aggressive in some ways, and then other ways we're very passive. So these gunas, this is just a way of understanding how we have these different tendencies. And the whole idea of samskaras is that we're not born into this world with a clean slate. That we're not, that it's not that everything is taught to us, that we may have a perfect example of two parents who are very calm and mild and sweet, and yet the child grows up to be very aggressive and mischievous and everything. So we attribute it to these samskaras from a past lifetime. It's a theory, not something that can be very easily proved, scientifically proved, but it makes sense. It makes sense. Otherwise we have difficulty in understanding. Some people like to say that these tendencies are genetic, that we get them from the parents through the genes. But the answer that will be given by Vedanta is that we're born into that family who have those genes that will transfer them because of our past lifetime. So they can be worked together that way. But we see that children can be very different from the parents also. So I don't know if they're hidden genetic traits and things like that, or anyhow, this samskara theory doesn't depend on the DNA or biological transmission or anything like that. So anyhow, M as two things: Western educated and also member of the Brahmo Samaj. That the Brahmos did not believe in a lot of things that we take for granted. This rebirth, probably they accepted that more or less, because they followed the Upanishads. So this may be particular with them, that he had that doubt because he, as he says, he had a Western education. The most of all was the educated young men who came to Sri Ramakrishna went to Christian missionary schools. So they probably heard a lot about this reincarnation being nonsense. And there's only one birth and then one life, and after that you go to heaven or you go to hell, something like that. So anyhow, he didn't have any deep conviction with regard to rebirth and the samskaras. But it seems like he didn't have any very strong feeling against it, that he was open, just had some doubts. So he wanted to ask, because he had asked Ramakrishna earlier. So this is also another theme that comes. The other thing is the avatar. M did not believe in that, partly because it also fits in with this reincarnation. If you don't believe in that, you're talking about someone coming age after age, and partly because Christian doctrine that Christ was the only Son of God, and partly because of the British English education. So, idea of the guru. Also, they didn't accept this idea of guru, the Brahmos.
During that period in Bengal, there was a strong influence of these Christian missionaries.
Of course, very strong. As I was saying, because the parents wanted their children to learn English. That was one of the only options. There weren't too many Hindu schools that were English medium. They may have taught a little bit of English. So uh, most of the time, the parents thought that was more important. Send them to a Christian missionary school, thinking that, well, they're probably not going to get converted anyhow, but they'll get the tool of English, and they can get a good job, just through civil service or something like that. Yeah. So and the Indian population, there's always a little bit of hidden respect for the British, because they were so prosperous and so powerful. How do they walk into a country and just take it over without a battle or anything like that? Huh? So a little bit of admiration, maybe not respect, a little bit of admiration, and then a little bit of this idea that they were very thoughtful people, that they had a lot of high philosophical thinking and everything like that. So that was part of it. The other thing was that they wanted to please them, somehow get into good favor. So if they thought, if the British find that we don't hold any of these ideas of these uh, native people. Huh? So image worship, horrible. British said it's horrible. They said it's horrible. Kali worship, the worst type of idolatry is Kali worship. So they say it's also horrible. Huh? The interesting thing about the Kali worship is that it was an Irish woman, Sister Nivedita, who was one of the most influential people in showing the beauty behind and symbology behind the Kali worship. She gave a very well-known talk at someplace, Albert Hall or something, some big place. They arranged a big meeting, and
also in the Kalighat too.
and Kalighat
Yes.
also.
And they accepted.
Yeah, she was accepted, of course, by the Hindus because she was defending them and everything. So a very complex period where there's of course a little bit of this, maybe we can say outright hatred of the British. They were standing on the necks of the people a little bit, and of course revolutionaries ready to die for that, and at the same time a little bit of this admiration and a little bit of trying to get them to approve. So this was, I think, a strong element of the Brahmo Samaj. Yeah.
The syllabus was also controlled by the British. The educational curriculum.
Educational syllabus, yeah, at the missionary schools. Yeah. So anyhow, now everything is in this transitional period for M. His thinking is undergoing a great change because of course, contact with Sri Ramakrishna. So he said, but he, meaning M, had admitted a few days before that it was on account of others' good tendencies, as samskaras, from past births, that he showed such great devotion to the master. And this is what I was saying, because he had only met him one or two times before. Already he's inviting him to his house. He's confiding in him and became very, very close to him. Later on, he had thought about the subject and had discovered that he was not yet completely convinced about inherited tendencies. He had come to Dakshineshwar that day to discuss the matter with Sri Ramakrishna. Master, well, what do you think of Adhar? Now, Thakur, a very common question. He used to ask very often one devotee, what do you think of this devotee? Or he would ask him, or he would ask, what do you think of me? Huh? Now, it sounds a little bit odd to us. Is he looking for flattery or something like that? But this is how he could judge the ability of the devotee to appreciate spiritual values and virtues and qualities and everything. So this was helpful for him to see how far somebody had come along. This was a little bit of his way of seeing, and not that he needed M's opinion, but he wanted to know the nature of M's mind. Could he appreciate this Adhar? Master, what do you think of Adhar? M. He has great yearning for God. Master, Adhar too speaks very highly of you. M remained silent a while and then began to speak of past tendencies, samskaras. M. I haven't much faith in rebirth and inherited tendencies. Punarjanma, samskara. Will that in any way injure my devotion to God? So this is a nice way of putting it. He doesn't really believe in it. It's a little bit open to him. Now, if he says he admitted earlier that Adhar had good samskaras, and then that means that there's some inner contradiction in his thinking. How can he be born with good tendencies from a previous lifetime if he didn't have a previous lifetime? So he's a little bit confused. He's not quite sure how much he believes of this and how much he believes of that. This is really when we analyze the things we believe in, we find lots of contradictions also that we don't think through and don't realize all the time. So he's really asking him, I don't really need you to convince me about these things. I just want to know that is it really necessary for me to bother about these things? Do I really have to come to a conclusion? And we have to ask ourselves that question with regard to so many things. So many things. And do we believe that the endless cycles of this universe, do we believe it was created at one time? There's so many different things that we can be a little confused about, and we always want to come to some conclusion. We always want somebody to tell us, no, this is true. That yes, it happened this way and not that way. And we don't always find those types of answers, and we have to ask ourselves, how much time and effort do we want to give to these questions? And very often we'll find that the best answer is that if I can analyze it enough to understand that there's no possibility of some conclusive answer, then leave it aside. Then leave it aside. Is it really necessary for my spiritual life? Say rebirth. If some people feel that this believing in rebirth means I believe the soul exists when the body falls, a very positive idea. And somebody else can say that if I believe in rebirth, then I am identifying myself with this transmigrating soul, when really I'm the Atman. Atman is not born and doesn't die. And in the Gita, we find these side by side, these two ideas. That they just take chapter 2 of the Gita, we'll find that side by side, I was never born and I never die. along with how many births I've had, how many deaths I've had. So if we want to be very staunch Advaitins, then we go with this: I was never born, I never die. What is this talk of reincarnation? Or we say that we're talking about the subtle body being born and dying, and we're not talking about the self. The self is unchanging; it can't undergo birth and death. So there are positives and negatives for everything. I sometimes think that we get too identified with ourselves as an individual with this idea of rebirth. Who was I before? Who will I be in the next lifetime? The real Advaitin will say, no, I am the witness of this body after body, life after life. I'm the unchanging one. So different ways of looking at it. So Thakur is very good here. He says, it is enough to believe that all is possible in God's creation. Now, does Thakur himself believe in rebirth? It seems obvious. He gives different answers. Sometimes that he'll just give very short shrift with these questions. That he'll say, yes, we find something like that in the Gita. He'll say things like that. But otherwise, when he talks with such conviction, say with the Adhar and the samskaras, very strong conviction that how many lifetimes we've had and how we've developed all of these things and what grace it is to have the human body and all of these things. So he didn't talk about it much. He didn't talk about who will be in the next lifetime, this and that, because he wanted us to focus on who am I now and how do I get devotion now. These two things. That was more his interest. And that respect, a little bit more like Buddha. He said, don't ask these questions. That it's as if you have an arrow that's been shot into you and you need to get the doctor to take it out. But before the doctor can do it, you have to find out all these questions. Who shot the arrow? What was his village? What was his cat? All of these different questions. He said, by the time you get the answers, you'll be dead. So don't waste your time with all of these types of questions. This is why Thakur was always telling M, don't argue, don't reason anymore. It wasn't about what is the nature of the self. It wasn't about what is the goal of life. It was about these types of questions that don't have easy answers. So it is enough to believe that all is possible in God's creation. Never allow the thought to cross your mind that your ideas are the only true ones and that those of others are false. Then God will explain everything. Now, the other thing was that Thakur, he looked upon all of these different philosophical positions as different spiritual paths. We know that he wasn't like the acharyas that looked upon them as true or false. Is it true that there are many jivatmas, or is there only one? You have to decide. Is it many or is it one? For Sri Ramakrishna, each one is a spiritual attitude which will be helpful to a different type of person. Then when we have that highest realization, and then we'll know or we won't know or it won't matter. Is it one or is it many? So the dualist will realize God, the qualified non-dualist, because each one was a path. For him, the truth was nothing but experience. It wasn't a doctrine. It went beyond all doctrines and philosophies and schools of thought and everything. What can a man understand of God's activities? The facets of God's creation are infinite. I do not try to understand God's actions at all. Now, he'll give different explanations. We do get different theories. But these are all for us to hold on to. The Divine Mother, she's placing us in a position that is best for us, like the mother cat and the kitten. This is an explanation of why things happen the way they do. Divine Mother did it for us. But he presents it as a way of allowing us to cling to something, because we need some type of guideline, some type of parameters in spiritual life, to have a spiritual attitude. So these are things that are different attitudes for him. Joto mot, toto pot. It's mot is a type of attitude. Uh, it can be a school of thought. It can be a different religion, but it can also be just what is our worldview? There's a nice term in German, Weltanschauung. They use a lot of these Germans, this idea. What is our worldview? Everybody has a worldview. The scientist, it'll be one thing. They see everything as a combination of the atoms and molecules and things like that. The artist will have a different worldview. They'll see everything as a beautiful combination of colors and textures and things like that. Everyone has a different worldview. Some will see it as just uh, random creation. Others, they'll see the hand of God in everything. A different worldview. And we can make spiritual progress with any of these. And we shouldn't think that one is absolutely right and the others are all wrong. Some may be more logical, some may yield better results. But Thakur says, even going through the back door of the house, you can get inside. So I do not try to understand God's actions at all. This is also the idea of the point of view of the Shaktas and the worshippers of Divine Mother. We have the beautiful Kamalakanta song. Huh? Though I've been trying to figure out Mother all of my life, I still have no idea who you are. Huh? And now I think you're male. Now I think you're female. Now I think you're the void. Huh? So thinking of all of these things, yes, confuses poor old Kamalakanta. Huh? So it's kind of a common theme that part of this idea of worshiping Mother as the Divine Mother is that there'll always be a little bit of this Mahamaya aspect. There'll always be a little of this veil of Maya, not allowing us to know the truth. And knowing the truth for Thakur is just so different. Knowing the truth for him is realization. That's all. We have a person can be described in 100 different ways. For him, each one is okay. Some may be more accurate, some less accurate. But you meet the person. That's the truth of the person. Then you have the person there. You know the person. You experience that directly. And then there's no point in trying to describe that person. How many names does he have? How many forms does he have? All of that. There's no point in any of that. I've heard that everything is possible in God's creation, and I always bear that in mind. Therefore, I do not give a thought to the world, but meditate on God alone. Yeah, we have a tendency to, I think, put too much emphasis on this idea of Brahman being the ground of the world, that the external things, are they real or are they unreal? For Sri Ramakrishna, the direction to go was inward. If we say that Brahman is covered with Maya, and that nothing really exists but Brahman plus name and form, if we take this as a doctrine for the external world, we'll end up in lots of confusion. Either we'll have to think, though, what this Brahman is actually some type of matter, or energy. We're just the atoms in there. How do we think that here is really consciousness itself? With a name and form attitude, very difficult concept. Huh? We almost have to think this Brahman as energy, prana. We find this idea in the Upanishads. But when we talk about the innermost self, we can easily understand these things. Not easily realize, but easily understand how this infinite, absolute, pure consciousness gets covered over with this false identification with the body, the mind, and the senses, and everything. So there we have our direct experience. Everything with the world, unless we get that mystic type of vision that Thakur had. I see everything a manifestation of consciousness. That means the mind goes to a different realm. Even that is not universal. We don't find every tradition will come up with that same conclusion. Even that will be in accordance with one's spiritual attitude. So the Buddhists getting nirvana, they may not say anything like that. They may just remain silent, What is their nature? How do they understand the self? Emptiness. How does the Vedantin understand the self? Same emptiness, only it's pure consciousness. So I always think, we have this example of seeing the glass either half empty or half full. I think between Vedanta and Buddhism, it's not half empty and half full. We either see it as completely empty or completely full. You take a glass with nothing in it. It's full, huh? There's air inside. It's full, but on the other hand, it's empty. So when we say that Brahman is empty, that means it's devoid of anything external, foreign to it. We look at our own innermost consciousness. If we say it's empty, that means that it can be filled with everything. We look at a mirror. The mirror is empty because there's no picture on it. There's nothing there, but it can reflect. It's always filled with an image. So both have to be true at the same time. There was a very important philosopher named Heidegger, and he used to say that one of his kind of foundational statements was the ground of being is nothingness. So if it's just like Thakur's tub of dye, that liquid, it has to be colorless if it can account for all of the possible colors. Light has to be invisible if it can account for for us to be able to see things as it is. So these two things go hand in hand. Anyhow, Thakur is talking about this idea of not bothering too much about this external world and how it came into being, why it came into being. These are all dead-end questions. So he says, therefore, I do not give a thought to the world, but meditate on God alone. Once Hanuman was asked, what day of the lunar month is it? Hanuman said, I don't know anything about the day of the month, the position of the moon and stars, or any such things. I think of Rama alone. Thakur repeats this many, many times in the Gospel. Yeah. Because this is where we get our direct answer. Everything else is speculative. Everything else is seen through the lens of the mind. But looking at the self, we can do it by transcending the mind. The mind becomes still. Then we have that vision of the self within. Can one even understand the work of God? He is so near. Still, it is not possible for us to know him. Balaram did not realize that Krishna was God. That is true, sir. Balaram was his brother, huh? Yeah, with him all of the time. And still did not realize. Of course, they say that those who are closest to the incarnations are the last ones to recognize them. We look at Holy Mother's family, Thakur's family, and the village people. One or two recognize them, that's all. Master, God has covered all with his Maya. He doesn't let us know anything. Now, we talked about when Swami Sarvadevanandi was here, we talked about this Maya quite a bit. This Maya has different aspects to it. The sense in which it's used here, it'll be both. It has a cosmic sense and it has an individual sense. So there's Maya with a capital M. This is how the Shaktas, to some extent the Advaitas, but more the worshippers of Divine Mother, how they explain this universe. That everything comes about through this divine power. So Maya becomes something like a divine power. But it's a type of power that also covers the real nature of things. There's something delusive about it. So that means that when the individual comes to take himself to be the individual, it's because there's a covering of ignorance. So we have this universal aspect, this cosmic Maya, and then we have the individual avidya, ignorance, which is also called Maya sometimes, because both terms can be used. So this cosmic Maya is a way of saying that this power belongs to Brahman. The strict Advaitins, the Shankaracharya school of Advaita Vedanta, looks upon Maya more as some type of delusive power. For Thakur, it's some divine power. There's no negative element to it, except for the fact that this whole universe comes into creation, but the individual forgets his real nature. So that part of Maya is there. But otherwise, it's the glory of God. Aishwarya, he uses this term very often. And look at this as a lordly power and the glory of the Brahman to be able to manifest this whole universe. And really, this is closer to what we find in the Upanishads, that Brahman will project this universe. So the universe will come directly from Brahman. It'll have some type of independent existence being projected out of it, yet upheld by Brahman. Brahman is never separate from it, as in a dream. The dream takes on a life of its own once it's there, but it can't exist unless the dreamer is dreaming it. But everything takes place on its own. We often ask, everybody asks, why is this world the way it is? Well, how could God create a world with so much suffering and war and everything like that? There's Maya that is part of this creation, covers the individual, and this ego comes, and these desires come, and this feeling of separation comes. And so this is why Swamiji will say, don't blame God, blame man for all of these things. But ultimately, we can say that once this little bit of free will entered into man, and a little bit of this ignorance covered the real nature of man, everything spun out of control. There's a little bit of this story of the Garden of Eden. This before it was kind of a pre-Maya, and then eating of the tree of knowledge, the apple, eating the apple, a little bit of allowing this sense of individuality. And now I realize I'm a man, and I realize that she's a woman, and all of these other things come after that. So we can say that, yes, this is part of the divine scheme. Not the will of God that people will be killing each other, but we give them a little chance to do things on their own, and they mess it up. So, but as I say, he'll give so many different interpretations. There'll be some people who will say, no, I see everything as perfect. It's all just a play. It's very hard for us to see that.
Witness will always observe this as a cosmic Maya, right? The witness, we think in that light.
Yeah, we have this idea that if we remain in that state of being the witness, then we don't identify with the mind. We can observe how this delusion is still there within the mind. We can observe how the mind still has attachments and passions and all of these things. We can observe how the mind still feels a sense of separation from other people. We have our own people, we have strangers, we have enemies, all of that. The witness can see all of that, but not identify with it. And remaining as the witness, a little transformation will take place within the mind. So that this veil of ignorance, if we know that we're the witness, pure consciousness, then who do we fear? Who is separate from us? Who is different from us? So both things are there. It'll bring about transformation, and it'll also bring about separation, so that we feel we're something other than body, mind, senses. God has covered all with his Maya. He doesn't let us know anything. Maya is, now we get our comedy concept. So this tendency that is in the human being for lust and greed, and we can add pride and anger, jealousy, all of these different passions, that these go along with this whole idea of Maya. Because if we analyze, why do we have anger? Why do we have fear of other people? Everything goes back to this false identification with his lower self and with his body and mind. If I know I'm one with the Brahman, then who is an enemy to me? Who do I fear? What do I long for? What desire do I have? If I know that I'm perfect and perfectly fulfilled. So, because this ignorance is really uh, the the seed out of which all of the passions arise, and this ignorance is Maya. We're born with it. Why are we born with it? Well, different answers. We were reading Paramesh Maharaj. He said, how many thousands and thousands and thousands of lifetimes have we lived identifying with the body? Naturally, we're born with it. We're born with the mind going outward, with no sense of any inward uh, indwelling presence of God, anything like that. And this becomes a samskara. We're born with it, but we also create it. And these are the things that we have to undo. And it's very difficult to undo these things because they've become so ingrained. Samskaras, uh, they really, we have this image of a ball of wax that has grooves in it. It's not simply ripples on the surface. It's something very, very deep rooted, these samskaras, so it's hard to get rid of them. So this is Maya. This is the Maya as it applies to the individual. So we have both things. This is the Maya of Mahamaya, of the Divine Mother, that power through which she can create this whole universe, enter into this universe, and then she herself becomes covered by this Maya. This is another funny idea. It's a very beautiful idea that God alone dwells within each and every being as the real individual there, but this false identification takes place. So the sun being reflected in all the different containers, and each container that reflected sun identifies with that the container in the water, the body-mind complex. And this is Maya. And Maya, which is responsible for the whole process of reflection, and then it's Maya, which is that false identification. So when it says Maya is nothing but this lust and greed, that means that it's the passions that grow out of ignorance that keep us attached to the body and the mind and everything. So sometimes he says that Maya, the ego is Maya. Sometimes he says time is Maya. There's a very nice idea that time is Maya. Then we understand everything is just flowing down this river of time. What is substantial there? What do we hold on to there? What happened to the last 50 years of our lives? Where did all of this go? This flow, Maya. We get a real sense of the dreamlike quality of the world when we think in terms of time. He who puts Maya aside to see God can see him. Now we're talking about individual ignorance, putting that aside. It won't change the Maya that creates the universe. Now we're talking about the individual trying to transcend, to go beyond this veil of Maya. Once, when I was explaining God's actions to someone, God suddenly showed me the lake at Kamarpukur. I saw a man removing the green scum and drinking the water. The water was clear as crystal. God revealed to me that Satchidananda is covered by the scum of Maya. He who puts the green scum aside can drink the water. Now, what does this mean? Satchidananda is covered by the scum of Maya. We take it both internally and externally. But this is what I was saying before. I don't find it too beneficial to think that if I can remove this covering of name and form, that I'll see pure consciousness sitting there. To me, this is a difficult concept, that to see God dwelling within all inanimate objects and everything. We can see God dwelling within human beings. We see that light of consciousness. But it's the ground of inanimate object. This is for the mystic. Thakur, it was so clear to him. Everything's chinmaya, chingana. It was very clear to him. But for us, if we understand this internally, that what is the scum on the surface of this ocean of this lake? Huh? This is my false conception of who I am, which is based on ignorance, and which is a combination of all sorts of personality traits that I have, and all desires I have, and samskaras, and all of the passions, and all of the pettiness, and anger, and hatred, and jealousy, all of those things that define me as a person from the lower point of view. Underneath all of that is pure consciousness. That we can understand very easily. How pure consciousness underlies this external world is a very difficult concept. Either we say everything is like a dream, or we say that this Brahman consciousness is manifesting itself in some as a form of energy, something like that. And we have both ideas. The Upanishad is more than Brahman projecting itself as elements. Huh? When we read in the Taittiriya Upanishad and others, God thought, let me be many. What did he do? He didn't dream this universe. He projected the different elements. This space and fire and air and all of that, and they combined and caused this universe. More is a type of divine energy and prana or something. Then there'll be others. Swami Sarvadevananda kept talking about this Ajatavada. That there'll be others who say, no, there was no projected universe like that. That it's almost as if just in a dream. That there's no substance to any of it. Thakur would say that these are all different theories and different ideas. Choose the one you like. But for me, I like the other one better. I don't like to call this world unreal like a dream. He says that many, many times. So when it says the water was clear as crystal, that's the real nature of the self. It's perfectly clear, perfectly clean. Who am I? Huh? Am I somebody filled with all sorts of bad habits and bad qualities and everything? No, I'm the self. I'm the pure consciousness. I'm the witness of everything. Everything I experience coming through the senses and through the mind, but I'm the seer of everything. I recognize the defective nature of the mind and the impurities of the heart. I recognize these things and I try to change them. But at the same time, I know that this scum that's covering over this Satchitananda is my false identification, self-identification with this personality. Let me tell you a very secret experience. Once I had entered the wood near the pine grove and was sitting there when I had a vision of something like the hidden door of a chamber. I couldn't see the inside of the chamber. I tried to bore a hole in the back with a nail knife, but did not succeed. As I bored, the earth fell back into the hole and filled it. Then, suddenly, I made a very big opening. So we have to feel some keen sense of being in a state of ignorance and some keen desire to realize the truth. This is a typical explanation given for Buddha, that everything seemed false to him, that all this life of enjoyment in the temple of singing and dancing and eating too much and drinking too much and all of that it became a horror show for him. He said, no, I must realize the truth, that longing for truth. From a devotional point of view, it would be longing for God. There's not terrible amount of difference, just again, worldview is a little bit different. So this feeling that somehow we're not saying things correctly. One of my favorite statements in the Gospel is made by M. Thakur asked him about something. Do you believe this and that? He said, no, I don't know too much about anything. Only one thing I know is that I'm not seeing things rightly. A very beautiful statement. I have no idea that what is the real nature of this external world, this and that, but I know that things aren't the way they seem to be. One of the main ideas of Maya. Things aren't as they seem to be. This appearance is something that is hiding the reality. Of course, we can say that this appearance is the manifestation of that reality. Huh? whether we say positively or negatively. But so anyhow, this seems to be what Thakur is saying here, that we know that this truth is hidden within, and yet it seems so hard to get to it. It's so close to us. It's too close to us. Huh? It's so too close to us that it's always behind us. It's that light which is always shining. We keep turning around; it's always still behind us. Huh? I like this image of trying to see the back of our heads. Huh? We can spin around as fast as we want; we won't be able to do it because it's the seer itself. It can never be seen. It's the seer itself. Yeah, this is why self-effort only takes us so far. If we fall down on the ground, we can lift ourselves off the ground. But if we want to lift ourselves into the air, we can't do it. Huh? Somebody else has to lift us up. So this is then that grace has to come. Uttering these words, the master remained silent. After a time, he said, "These are very profound words. I feel as if someone were pressing my mouth." Very often he would say that. Sometimes he would say it if he was in the company of devotees who wouldn't appreciate it or understand it. Very often he would say that, "Oh, you're all my very own. No one is a stranger here. Let me tell you something very secret. Gucho kata." It's interesting that when M first wrote the gospel, he did it serially. It was in 5 different parts. The last one is mostly later things, but in the first 4 parts, he had enough to do one huge book at the very beginning. But he must have thought that, let me pick out things that I think are important or interesting. We don't know what his mind thought was. Uh, but he published 1 volume. It was greatly appreciated. Then he said, "Oh, I have enough information for another one." So he did a second one, a third. But he reserved the 4th one. Almost all of these secret talks are in the 4th volume, because he must have thought very carefully, should I let others know these things when he told us that I'm telling you something very secret? And then probably thought for the welfare of the world he had to do it. Or maybe his doubt was that people will misconstrue it, which has happened, of course, that they won't be able to understand the hidden meaning and symbology of the whole thing. So we're going to get something also that can be very easily misunderstood. He says, "These are very profound words. I feel as if someone were pressing my mouth. I've seen with my own eyes that God dwells even in the sexual organ, the yoni. Huh? The yoni, of course, has the meaning of womb, and it has a very sacred meaning. That this idea of sexual relations and everything as being something sinful is so contrary to this other idea that this is how creation takes place. This is how life comes. This is in every creature in the world. This union of Shiva and Shakti is what allows for future generations, for children to be born. Problem is that tremendous amount of attachment and jealousy and all sorts of things come out of it. But the act itself was always considered something sacred. This is why we have Shiva Lingam and the Yoni. The Shiva Lingam and the Yoni is very much like Kali and Shiva Kali standing on the body of Shiva, only it's reversed there. We have the lingam will be on top, the Yoni will be on the bottom. But this is the whole symbology behind the Sankhya philosophy and many different types of philosophy. The male principle and the female principle, the active principle and or immanent transcendent principle, that this is how we explain the process of creation. The same way, in the same terms that we use for the process of creation of an individual. I saw him once, God, in the sexual intercourse of a dog and a bitch. The universe is conscious on account of the consciousness of God. So the universe is conscious. That doesn't mean The tables and chairs are conscious. He's talking now about each individual being. There's consciousness in everything that has some mechanism, has some way to receive consciousness. It's like electricity; it's everywhere, but we have to have plugs and we have to have wires and all sorts of things. So this we can say that the consciousness will be in human beings, of course, in animals, in plants. We have tremendous research work that was done by J.C. Jagdish Bose, and then Bosi Sen, who was his disciple, showing how plants and things can also react in a way that seems to suggest that there is some type of awareness there. Central sense, whether it's really conscious awareness, it won't be the same way as that we have conscious awareness, but still, things, all plants are light sensitive as they go towards the light. We even know that if there's some tremendous say some murder is committed, some horrible violent thing is there, plants will dry up. There instances of things like that, and one very interesting thing, the Japanese did some study where I think the way that the water molecules formed and everything when they were playing music. Anybody ever see that study? As if they could react to it somehow. Anyhow, we don't know. We don't know to what extent. It's like the sun shining. To what extent objects can reflect that light. Some things, clear pond, you'll see perfect reflection of the sun. Other things, you'll see a little bit of light. And when it's on the black asphalt, we don't see any reflection there. But still, it's shining on it. So this consciousness that when we say consciousness of the universe, every being that has consciousness is all from that one light, from the sun. It's not that it's growing out of the brain or the mind or anything. There's only one source for consciousness. This is a Vedantic position, of course. So it's just reflecting whatever can accept that reflection. It'll all come from that one sun of consciousness. So the universe is conscious on account of the consciousness of God. Sometimes I find that this consciousness wriggles about, as it were, even in small fish. So this consciousness and prana and life. Now we know that plants have life. We may explain it in terms of prana, not as much as consciousness. But this is my point. The Upanishadic worldview did not make that big distinction between consciousness and prana and life. So that we can understand things. When we see we see the bright eyes of a young child understanding something, then of course that light of consciousness. But we see animals wriggling on the ground, still that divine prana is there. How much, if there's some consciousness, will be there also. How much we can't really say. The carriage came to the crossing at Shobha Bazar in Calcutta. The master continued saying, "Sometimes I find that the universe is saturated with the consciousness of God, as the earth is soaked with water in the rainy season." Now, this is what I say is not something that we should expect to be able to experience necessarily ourselves. This is the mystic. This is the vision that the mystics have, something like that. We can experience the nature of the self because I am that. To see this world that other way, the mind has to rise to a very high level. We don't know. In some tradition, the Dvaita Vedanta tradition, it'll be more, we'll see this universe disappear. For Sri Ramakrishna, that'll also happen, but coming back down, they'll see everything as a manifestation of consciousness, soaked with consciousness, as a congealed form of consciousness. or see the Divine Mother everywhere. Okay, let us stop here. Om Niranjaram Nityamanantarupam Bhaktarokam Bhatudvikraham Ishavataram Ganeshamidya Ramakrishna Shirasadam. We bow our heads before Sri Ramakrishna, who is stainless, of infinite nature, whose heart melts in sympathy for his devotees, who is an embodiment of the divine and the Supreme Lord, and ever worthy of our worship. Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. Peace, peace, peace be unto all.